Physicists say that forward time travel is possible by basically going near the speed of light and turning around. But they say backwards time travel, impossible, can't be done. But I figured out a way to do backwards time travel.
Really?
Sort of.
Sort of.
So the caveat, I figured out how to do it in a video game, in a massive multiplayer video game, which is basically all of the characters in the game are all real people who are on the internet interacting with each other. There's not artificial intelligence. You look confused, Steve. Have you ever played a video game?
Yes, I played. Yeah, they had them when I was younger.
So I figured out how to have backwards time travel in a video game. And so how that would work, everything that happens in the game is recorded on the game servers. And the game develops a personality profile of each player based on two things, based on surveys and questions when you're installing the game, and then on what you do, actions you do within the game. And then if you're in the game in the current time, like you haven't traveled backwards in time yet, it's just a normal video game. You're interacting with the other players who are controlled by real people in real time. But if you travel back in time in the game, at first you're viewing the recorded history of the game, like somebody videotaped it and you're just watching it, but you can move around. And then once you start interacting with people and making changes, you're no longer watching a static video of the past. It switches to interacting with characters based on the real people's profiles. So you're not interacting with other real people. You're interacting with the game's prediction of what it thought they would do if you traveled back in time. So let's say I'm going to use the example of a Wild West video game and you're in a saloon and there's a bar fight. So you travel back in time in the video game.
Right.
So you join in the melee and you punch a guy. So as soon as you do something significant like punch a guy, now the game's running predictive algorithms to predict what would have happened
had you done that,
had you been there in the first place. And so that's what's called a new timeline.
And then what happens to what the real status was before you went back and changed things? Is that just eviscerated, like that never happened? Or is that stored on another timeline and there's two realities?
So there's one timeline. Everybody who plays the game has the same timeline. So you've changed the timeline. And then there's what's called a butterfly effect. So what you change causes other changes and whatever. But the video game would try to minimize that because it's got to redo everything.
Right.
Well, at least some things. And it wants to minimize the amount that has to be redone. So the game, every night, the servers for the game will be offline for a few hours as it recalculates the new timeline. Each time a player sits down to start playing the game, as the game is loading before they can play, for a few minutes, it shows you the changes to the timeline. And I saw scientific documentaries about how memory works in a human brain. So the way human memory works is that when you recall a memory, your mind changes it a little bit and then stores it back. And that's why, like, eyewitness testimony, you're a lawyer, you're a patent lawyer, I think, but whatever, you know about law.
Not a lot of eyewitnesses.
You know about how eyewitness testimony is sort of poor and that
yes, I do know that.
People accidentally change their, you know that from being a defendant?
No, I know that in high school, we had a debate topic on criminal justice procedures, and we read Elizabeth Loftus's studies. She's the preeminent eyewitness testimony expert in the country and has all the studies about how wildly inaccurate it is, like 50%. It's like horrible. It's that bad.
You went to a better high school than I did. So your brain does that anyway.
Yes.
So this is just guiding that along so that when it gets stored back into your brain, it's on this changed timeline that everybody shares.
Right.
So I give the example of the bar fight in the Wild West saloon. So if you go back, well, if somebody else goes back and punches you in the face, next time you play the game as it's loading will show you that scene with you in it, with this change in it that this other player went back and did later. which was to punch you in the face.
I just want a chance to go back and hit him. Is that going to be part of the game? I think that's,
yeah, so then
that's what's really
you
important.
can
to
if
me.
you want.
Can use it to punch people.
I want
That's
vengeance,
what-
Tom.
yeah.
That's just make sure they put a vengeance subroutine in this thing. That's all I care about.
So the game might have to show you the change timeline several times over several days for the modified memory to sink in, but eventually it'll sink in. And there was a thing that happened in the real world called the Satanic Panic of the 1980s.
Yep.
And this shows how memories can be manipulated. This is a fun example. So
Satanic ritual abuse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what was the Satanic Panic?
you might remember this from the news.
A lot of people reported being abused by satanic cults when they were little, and it was claimed that the therapist kind of put that in their heads, I guess. But there were a lot of people who came out saying that there was satanic. It's like SRA. There's even an acronym, Satanic Ritual Abuse, and people reported, that they'd from a really early age been abused by these cults and stuff.
But there's these weird themes in the news. Sometimes it's shark attacks. In the early 80s, it was satanic cults for a while.
Right.
And there was this particularly famous case where a kid got murdered by some pedophile or something in California. And some crazy psychologist was interviewing all the kids in the neighborhood and twisted their memories to think that all of their parents were in this cult.
Yeah.
And they ended up sending half the neighborhood's parents, both men and women, to prison. And some of them are still in prison, I believe. I think I saw an A&E documentary on this.
Yeah, no, it's been largely discredited, I guess, but it was considered a real big deal at the time.
But when you see that, a normal person would think, oh, that's horrible. These innocent people are in jail. I think, how can I exploit this for my own person? And so my idea is to use that memory manipulation that they accidentally used to wrongfully convict these people, but to use it to make a fun time travel video game.
Well, that's making lemonade out of lemons. That's
That's
right.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, so for bigger changes to your particular actions on a timeline, if it's a huge change, it might be hard to get people to believe it and to get it to sink in. So then the game would hypnotize you. It would try to hypnotize you to help the change timeline for some bigger change sink in. If just replaying it isn't enough, it could use hypnosis. And there's a new thing that's becoming popular among uber nerds called trans-cranial direct current stimulation. Basically, you put an electrical probe connected to a battery, you tape it to the skin on your head, and it applies current to your brain, and it manipulates how your brain works. So it can, depending on where you electrify your brain, it can have a different effect. And this is a real thing. It's not pseudoscience. It's been known since the 50s.
So you can control someone's brain based on what you set it at then?
Well,
or you can at least alter
it's not
it in some way.
direct control. It's right now
it's
they can't directly implant memories, but it can enhance your anger.
I need that.
It can.
It's really been flagging lately.
It can
Calm
cut
for
off your anxiety. It can
that I could use.
make you laugh uncontrollably.
That
My audience could use that.
Yeah.
My audience definitely could use that.
Cheat, yes.
Everybody gets a free pair of electrodes at Laugh Tracks from now on. It's
Best comedy club in the country.
I'll be up there with a car battery, and a couple of jumper cables.
So in real life, they use that during brain surgery. They'll poke parts of your brain with an electrified needle. They're looking for a place in your brain that causes you to have a seizure or something.
Right.
And so they'll poke your brain. They pull off your skull.
Do they just do process of elimination, or is it
They sort of know where to go.
Okay, good.
In the general area. This is.
Oops, he pissed himself. That's wrong.
Yeah.
Let's try this one.
Yeah.
Nurse.
But they'll poke the point of the brain and it'll cause them to erupt into laughter, uncontrollably.
Right.
So this isn't invasive. You're not
incredible,
cutting the skull off. You're just putting a probe on the top of your head.
I would just keep giving him erections. Just they can't be entertaining. Up, down, up, down, up, down. I don't know.
That'd be the angriest erection of all time.
Yeah.
I'm so horny but so mad at you. I can't stay. So then you wouldn't even have to be unconscious, it sounds like. It sounds like you could do this to a conscious person, right?
With their skull opened up.
Well, that part I missed.
No.
yeah.
You don't need to. You can get the same effect without opening up the skull.
Through transcranial stimulation.
Yeah. And one of the things it can do, it can make you smarter. And I'm thinking that it can probably mimic the effects. I didn't read an article about this specific effect, but I think hypnosis is where you're relaxing a critical thinking part of your brain voluntarily.
Right.
And I think you could have that same effect through this direct current stimulation. So when you're watching this modified timeline on your computer screen, it'll sink in better.
You could make someone think they're a chicken.
That would be good.
Yeah, because the hypnosis, and that if you have a touch
Right.
there,
Yeah, I suppose
or you could
come-
travel through time.
Right.
You could travel through time as a chicken.
You could travel through time as a chicken.
And the Three
That would be
Stooges made
perfect.
people think they were in Sing Sing. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, but you're now in Sing Sing. They used to swing the watch and make you think you were in Sing prison. So I know you guys don't know that, but that's old. So anyway,
Okay, so
hypnosis has many uses. What can I say?
Oh, that the old school with the watch, like
Yep,
they're getting very
yep,
sleepy,
yep.
and now
Oh, yeah.
they have like
Yep. The
and
gold
now they-
watch.
yeah.
Shit. And I have another guest. He wants me to call him in the middle of the damn podcast. Just riff.
Wow. Okay. So I'm not sure how you can precisely place the electrodes on someone's head to stimulate the right place, as opposed to going through the cranium to touch it. That seems like it would be dicey to me.
You kind of know about the area, and then you just kind of, it's like after you've been cooking for a while, you just kind of have it.
I
You just
guess.
kind of have the right amount.
But
so you don't have
isn't
to-
the skull insulating,
measured
so the
cups.
current's got to get through the skull to the brain? Like,
Yeah, I mean, you could think about the science all day. I mean, that's,
if you want it to work. But why
yeah,
do
I
that?
do,
you know what I mean?
why-
Let's just put some
why look at
electrodes on his head and
science?
see what happens. I
Right,
mean, as
just-
long as his insurance covers it, who gives a shit?
we have very good
We have
insurance.
very good insurance. That's
very
what's
good
important.
insurance policy.
Check the
Right.
Blue Cross card and then just go to town. I think.
Yeah, we
that's
do
what
check
should
their
do.
insurance. We're not monsters. We check their insurance policy tooth and nail to
right.
make sure they're covered.
We look for any weird clauses, anything that might bar coverage, so that we can fulfill Tom's video game ambitions.
Yes.
Which
This is for Tom. This is not for the people.
this is for
this
Tom.
is for
Tom has written this game out like a Unabomber manifesto on a piece of paper over here.
It's very detailed.
He's
very
not going to be
much,
happy
yeah.
when he hears that characterization, but that's fairly accurate. And
It's just with the detail of the Unabomber.
yeah, it's that level of
not
detail.
his other policies.
Right. He's
that-
not talking about blowing up the government or anything, but he writes like that. That's all we're saying.
Yeah, just could have went with any number of examples, but that one would fit as well.
Oh, and look at this. Joey Derderian has walked
Derderian.
in the room.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joey Derderian is here. So I'm about 2/3 through my idea, which is backwards time travel in video games. So basically, when you play the video game each day, you use various means to manipulate people's memories so they remember the changes that other people made when they traveled back in time. Okay. So the key insight of my idea about backwards time travel, and I don't know if any sci-fi movie or any sci-fi book has thought of this. I wouldn't doubt it if they have, but I think it's interesting. I think it's novel. So you're not actually traveling back in time, but you're manipulating everybody else's memories, including yours, to make it seem like you traveled in time. So philosophically, what's the difference?
Are there ethical concerns with this? If you just force someone to travel back in time and then they don't know that they really didn't.
Yes, there are ethical concerns.
To be honest, yeah.
That was a fairly broad
It's
question.
pretty-
So you're choosing to play the video game, though.
Okay, so it is
you're
at
waiving
least-
all
I mean,
rights.
how much are you really choosing? It sounds like a really cool game. Doesn't seem much of a choice to me.
Right? Yeah. Could you be persuaded so much that it doesn't feel like a choice?
Like the deterministic view that the game is awesome, and if I don't play it, people are going to judge me. Well, I don't want to be judged. Now I got to play the game, and I'm not even using free will anymore.
Yeah, that can happen.
It's
But-
very, very honest about. Yeah, there's ethical
It's worth.
concerns,
I
but,
say it's worth the risk for backwards time travel. For the
okay,
fun of backwards time travel, you risk other people fucking with your memories.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I mean, people mess with my memories every day I'm alive, so it sounds like
They call this gaslighting. That's the old phrase for this, by the way, where you make people think shit happened that didn't happen. That's,
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can look it up on Google when you're done.
Okay.
like
gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
Not what I would think it means.
No, you think it's lighting farts. I know.
Yeah,
but,
that's what I immediately
Is
jumped
it both? Is it both?
Yeah.
at the same time.
So
Could you
I just-
gaslight?
They didn't have lighters that were suitable for that when they invented the term. Like, you would definitely blow the house up.
Right.
So with advances in technology, now we can do that.
Now you can light farts, and the word has a double meaning.
That's beautiful.
So as fun as lighting farts is, I want to get back to the topic. Okay. So
Arguably much more important. Yeah.
a few points. So this modifying everybody's timeline, it works in a video game because your actions don't have physical side effects. In real life, if your whole real life was being recorded, you could have this same technique to travel back in time in the computer, but instead of having it be a totally virtual world, it's a taped version of the real world. But if you went back and, say, burned your neighbor's house down in this computer simulation of the real world, you leave the computer, you look out your window, the neighbor's house is still there.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Right.
But
Unfortunately.
in the pure video game world, the Wild West Saloon, fake Wild West Saloon, you can do that. You can burn somebody's house down and
So
it'll render. All it has to do is re-render things.
Right,
And
right.
the only side effect in the real world that matters is the other player's memories.
Mm-hmm.
And it uses these mind manipulation techniques.
Yeah. How long have you hated your neighbors, Tom? That's what I want.
Actually, I hated my childhood neighbors, but
That's what
That's
this
where
is
it's
about.
really
that's what
spawned
we're
from.
getting at here.
I don't
This is
have any
about
problems
revenge.
with
Yeah, because
my...
I was thinking about arson and how cool it sounds, but then you're like, it doesn't actually burn the house down. I'm like, well, that's no fun.
Yeah, that's the wrong kind of arson.
Right.
So back to recording the real life. So if there's cameras everywhere and everything's being recorded and the computer makes a profile of you in your real life, of everyone in their real life, you can travel back in time. Like you had a crush on a girl in college that you wanted but never got. You could go back,
Get laid in the video game world.
but it wouldn't. It's not technically time travel in that when you come back to the real world, it's not going to have any effects.
So you didn't really get laid.
Right.
Right.
It's like you're still a virgin
But-
with all these memories of climax.
But that's going to fuck with your real life memory because you're going to start to forget what was real and what wasn't.
Oh,
This technology would allow you to relive the past in a way, assuming everything was recorded and like cameras everywhere, like Big Brother everywhere. But I would advise against
It
that.
sounds terrifying.
I would advise just doing it in these virtual worlds.
Yeah, that's really bringing the PTSD to the fore, isn't it? It's like let's go through sixth grade again.
Right.
there was something.
Imagine if you do it.
Remember the time you barely got out of that white van alive? We're going to do that again.
This sounds kind of like an episode of Black Mirror.
That's
Where
what
they-
people tend
yeah.
to say on most of my ideas.
Yeah, but it's.
Do you watch a lot of Black Mirror?
See,
I've
yours
seen about
is-
half of them.
Yours is like much more practical, though. Like I could see like ways that this would actually
I mean, I think he's got
could in
code.
theory.
Yeah,
come to
that's what. Is it
fruition.
coded and ready to
Yeah,
rock?
do you have code somewhere?
I will
Because
try
I feel like
this.
you might. I feel like you might.
I'm hoping some genius will take this up. So there's an expression where if you're being oppressed or something bad happens to you, you can say to your oppressor, "You can't take my memories. At least I'll always have my memories." In this case, nope. You don't always have your memories because
What a
So this
shitty
game
defense.
leaves you with nothing. Is that what I understand?
but
What a crappy defense. You can't take my memories. Well, you can die.
well, yeah, I didn't. Well, yeah, but who cares? Basically, that's another philosophy
Yeah,
question.
it is.
Who cares if your memories are manipulated? Free will doesn't really exist anyway.
Found a way around every complaint that you could. You're like, oh well, what is existence?
just removing
anyway?
objections.
So,
Yeah, right. Free
So-
will
Just
doesn't exist.
devolving
You're
to pure nihilism is what we're doing here.
gonna have a hard time getting
So-
that claim published.
Does it really matter if you remember what you actually did or you remember what a smart computer predicted you would have done when somebody else traveled back in time
Yeah.
and changed the timeline?
It's an ethical quandary.
This sounds
Okay.
like the brain in a vat question.
I did an episode on a brain in the
Oh,
vat.
I love that question.
That's episode 3. You can go back
Okay.
and listen to it.
Episode 3.
I'll come back with notes and I'll have a bunch of holes to poke in it, maybe.
So yeah, Brandon pointed out the potential for evil because, of course, that's where his mind goes.
because there's.
It doesn't take you long to
I'm
get
not.
there.
I'm not saying. I'm saying somebody who's like less innocent as me would come up with. I could see that in
Yeah,
someone else's.
not everybody is a pug-loving, fun guy like Brandon.
Oh,
In
you
fact, I
had
don't
to bring up
think
the
anybody-
pugs.
Somebody's going to go back and murder all of your pugs.
Oh, that's so
Jeez.
brutal. Jesus
That'd be a
Christ.
hate
You're going to
crime,
get letters
right?
for that. ASPCA.
Luckily,
You're gonna get 5
Got
letters.
a chain of events. First listeners, then complaint
There are
letters.
pug associations too.
Yeah, and they're violent, so you should be careful. Now you're gonna have to look over
They
your shoulder.
scan podcasts day and night. Listen.
Pug rhymes with thug, Tom. That's what he's saying.
Right.
I won't go back and murder your pugs. I'll go back and take away your best memories of your pugs.
Oh,
so
wow.
much more fucked
God,
up.
that is malevolent.
Yeah,
You're
right.
talking about him being evil.
So-
That
So
is
then you
dark.
start to hate your pugs, and then you murder your pugs.
That is
So my-
seriously dark
So
shit.
my hands are clean.
I take back every bad thing I said about your idea. I think it's very ethical. I think it is fine. I think my pugs are fine. I think we're all okay.
Well, I don't have any pugs on the line.
So you were free to speak.
So backing out of the evil a little bit. So some people
just a touch, just a smidge.
So why are your memories of real things so important? Some people have a shitty genetic roll of the dice where they only remember the shitty things that happened to them, and they just go over them over and over in their mind. If a game can change that, at least by what happens in the game, and forces you to re-remember better things, it could make you happier.
Okay, listen. I'm at the point in life where things happen like your parents are like, oh, what are you going to do to take care of me when I'm older? It's really important that I remember shit just the way it happened.
Yeah,
You know what I
absolutely.
mean? That day in 1975 where I didn't get some toy I wanted, I really want to remember that when I'm picking out nursing homes. You know what I mean?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, they'll flip you over every month. What are you complaining about? You know what I mean? Well, I want to know that. I don't want to
right.
forget that.
Like those commercials, A Place for Mom. They always try to make it sound like it's the nicest place. Really,
I've
it's-
survived till payback time. I'm not about to fuck that up.
Well,
yeah,
or you
it's
could plug your mom into the game and
Revenge is a
then,
dish
payback
best
in the
served cold.
game.
Well, fine. If they have a suitably bad nursing home in the game, I'll leave her there. But you know, I mean, I didn't hear it sound like you designed that in. So far, I just have to drop her off in a bar fight.
Yeah, right. That'd be quicker too. Get stabbed and run to the hospital really quick.
Sorry, Mom, they don't have anesthetic. It's 1870. Pour some shitty whiskey on it.
Right.
So back to the backwards time travel video game. So a couple technical complications.
Couple. Really, just a couple. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
in the computer, not in your brain.
Okay,
I'm not
yeah.
worried about those complications.
Not worried about the brain, but yeah.
Right.
Okay, so the
Psychological
the
damage.
computer has to regenerate the timeline every time anybody goes back and changes it. So that's a lot of processing power.
Yeah.
So let's say there's a time zero in this Wild West video game. Nobody can go back farther than that. When the game is released, they set time zero. And so the longer the game is out on the market, the longer the timeline will be. So the more processing power is required.
Right.
But computer processing power with faster computer chips is also increasing.
Yes.
So you only need to slow down the complexity of creating the longer timeline enough that it doesn't outpace.
Moore's Law.
Process-
Right?
Moore's Law.
Yeah.
Exactly. Look at- wow. Very good. Holy shit. I didn't expect that.
Okay.
I heard
so,
a podcast. That's just
Moore's Law. Very
I
good.
get my info from podcasts.
Yeah, typically.
So the other thing is the game when you go back into the past and you start changing things, the game has to decide what's significant and what isn't. Like if you walk past a person and then in the street backward in time, it doesn't have to go back and re-show that to that person.
Unless they thought it was significant.
Well, the game is making guesses on what's significant. And so there's also a limit. If you've been playing the game for several years, every time you start the game, you don't want to watch 3 hours of everything that hundreds of people have changed. So you only want like 5-10 minutes of changes per day to be shown to you. But just like human memory, the longer time goes by, the more you forget. So the computer game would have to rely on the longer things have gone by, the least significant things people would forget, so it doesn't need to show them again. So hopefully there's a just like the Moore's Law problem, hopefully there's a homeostasis where you're forgetting things fast enough where your changes of the timeline don't outpace the speed that you're forgetting things.
Yeah.
And if you had photographic memory, it just wouldn't work for you. Sorry. They have all
It is.
they have all the benefit in the world in real life. They get screwed over in this video game.
Because of bandwidth, because it would take up too much for somebody with photographic memory, because because they would think of things more. Or
just the time of showing them the video of the changes.
Oh yeah.
And again, the direct current stimulation might be damaging your brain a little bit, and that would help with the forgetting things.
So there's that to look forward to.
Okay. And my last point, there's a thing that scientists have thought of recently called simulation theory, which is basically, how do we know we're not in the Matrix from the Matrix movie?
I don't think that's recent. I think that's incredibly old.
Whatever.
Okay. I'm just
Whatever,
pretty sure
hippies.
that's been around
That's
for
a line
long
from your
time,
act.
right?
It's been popular in like the
Yeah, Elon Musk
blogs and
talked
stuff.
about it
Elon
recently.
Musk talked about it
Okay.
recently. It's a fairly new, at least in popular culture.
Rebrandishing of an idea.
Yeah. So basically, if we are in a simulation and our real bodies are like the Matrix connected to computers in some real world somewhere, maybe we're also connected to my system with manipulated memories. So maybe in the world we perceive, backward time travel is possible. We just don't know it.
Makes sense.
Does it?
No.
Does it?
Nope, but I was playing customer golf on
There
that
you
one.
go.
so,
There you go.
I didn't explain that nearly as well as I hoped. I was hoping to blow your minds and just see like eyeballs
I
grow
think you just
big.
befuddled mine. I don't know if
Right.
you blew it, but
So basically,
might have popped a rod. I don't know if I blew it.
if
just
we're in a
think we're naming
simulation, we
cards.
might be in a simulation with this weird
Right.
backward time travel I thought of.
Right.
And then, so I had mentioned in the beginning before Joey got here that I thought this game would have to go offline for a few hours every night to recalculate the timeline.
Yeah.
But in the future, if processor speeds become near infinite, the amount of time it takes to regenerate this timeline approaches 0. So if it could regenerate the timeline instantaneously, then that is basically pure time travel. If it's not quite 0, it would be like Back to the Future, where he had a sister in the photograph who was disappearing
Right.
because going back and recalculating the timeline wasn't instantaneous. And then the last point is, if we are in the Matrix, our memories might be stored not in our brains, they might be stored on computers. And in that case, if it's regenerating this timeline because somebody went back and changed it, basically the computer could just block that memory for a few seconds. So like you're trying to remember what happened in this bar fight, the Matrix system would make you, oh, I don't remember. And while you're trying to remember, it's redoing the timeline. So it only has to actually redo your part of the timeline for the things right before you remember them. So if it hasn't gotten that far yet in its redoing of all the timeline changes, it can just make you forget it for a few seconds until it's done recalculating everything.
Okay.
Kind of like
So-
alcohol.
Right.
So yeah,
Effects of alcohol and drinking. You kind of piece the night together.
I like to think we are in a simulation with backwards time travel. And that was my
That's
idea.
comforting.
Is that
That's
comforting?
a comforting thought to you?
Scares the shit out of me.
I'm not sure I'm comforted by that.
No, I'm not whatsoever.
Yeah, I was
terrifying.
I was being
Everybody else
understated.
is afraid of time travel.
Well, afraid of being in a simulation more so than
Yeah.
than time
Yeah.
travel.
The idea that I'm being manipulated by a computer is not.
Or any kind of supreme manipulation to where I can't trust any kind of senses or my own thoughts. Like, do you
Right.
ever make a decision like, oh, do I want chicken or beef? Well, it's all a simulation anyway.
Yeah, so
You know, it's not
but
practical.
That's how we would destroy civilization.
Right.
But-
if everybody's like, fuck it, it's a simulation.
Yeah, right. Then nothing you do matters. And
Does it matter less though? I mean, why does real life matter? And why would
See,
it matter
yeah.
less?
There's this.
It's like an
Yeah.
instinctual gut feeling, but if you
Right,
really
it's-
rationalize it, it doesn't really matter less.
It's like on a
Well,
technical
it takes
level,
away
it
choice.
doesn't. But there's this weird. I don't know what it is like in my brain or whatever this is, where it's just the idea of taking away choice, even if I'm technically doing the exact same things, is less of a it makes me like a reflex kind of cringe.
It just
And I
makes
don't
you
know
less
what that
important.
is, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Right? I mean,
it-
you just.
it's just like it's a little bit of like
what little significance you think you have is gone.
We don't have much to start with.
Right.
So.
Even in my current view of how things work, it's not very impressive.
Right. Absolutely.
like religion. Religions tends to give people meaning, but your only really meaning is you're serving God, and you're earning brownie points to get into heaven or whatever.
Now, I mean, I didn't expect to get in such a philosophical conversation. I had a great idea.
What's the difference between serving a God and, say, instead of your purpose
And serving
being
a server?
serving one God, you're serving your future generations of humanity. You're doing things to benefit future versions of humanity.
It's very selfless.
Instead of one person, which is God, you're doing it for everyone in the future. And that still applies if you're in a simulation. I think that's a more comforting way to look at
I
it.
feel like it's a utilitarian approach to the
But how are you? I
simulation.
mean, the idea that
Instead
you're
of being
serving
a
anybody
slave
doesn't
to-
mean much if it's just determined
and
for
can
you.
get
And
unplugged
you're
in
not.
a second's notice. Like,
It's not determined for you. I mean, you're still, whether your core body is outside of the outside of the matrix or inside of the matrix, you're still, I mean, technically we're chemical reactions and there's no.
oh, that's an incredible deterministic view that
But-
everything is a series of events from chemicals and neurons exploding at certain
to
radiations.
me, that's more depressing than the thought of being in a simulation because
They're the same. They're just different. We're packaging the same idea in a different way, aren't
they're
they?
not exactly the same.
I mean, the end result is that you
'Cause
can't choose for
you
yourself.
could have a religious soul outside of the matrix.
I don't believe in souls in the first place.
But, okay, yeah, that was.
Well, no shit. You're a comic.
So now that I've brought the room down, who wants to go with their
I just
idea?
feel like I never took enough LSD. You know what I mean?
I've taken
I
plenty.
just never
and it
gave
still
it a fair
doesn't
shake.
sit
I just
well
never
with
gave it
me.
a fair shake.
I think LSD is one of the. There's a lot of drugs that, if you're old and frail, you can't take, like
Are you calling Steve old
cocaine.
and
Yeah, really. You're half right. I'm not frail. But
But I think LSD, you can be.
Timothy Leary took it. He wasn't exactly a spring chicken.
Right.
They give terminally ill people LSD now. You can take that one to the deathbed.
I don't know if I want to go out on acid.
I don't think I
What
would
if you have a
want to
bad
either.
trip? You know,
I wouldn't want to go out on acid either.
that's tough. Like, what were his last words? So,
Okay, somebody else, go ahead.
don't you feel like you didn't do much homework after that?
Oh,
Yes.
geez.
Don't you feel like you're going to get a did not come prepared to class after that?
Yeah, I didn't
Fine.
have anything that
Yeah,
spectacular.
Tom stole my idea. I was going to say that word for word.
Yeah, it's pure
So,
theft.
Yes, I would just say to the listeners, like if you're annoying,
Don't kill yourself.
Yeah, don't
because
kill
of me.
yourself because of Tom or because of not Tom.
Yeah,
and
just in general.
just in general,
Just don't kill
Maybe
yourself.
don't do it. And I'd just say like. This does not segue well into my idea at all because I was going to say
Kill yourself. That was your idea.
I'm comedian Steve Hansen.
I'm comedian Branden Milsk.
I'm your host, Tom Walma. This is Creativity Wasted. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and give a review or rating on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or wherever you got it. I have a website, creativitywasted.com, and I also started a Patreon. So if you love the show, consider donating to Patreon. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.